guys, so this week we're going to be talking about dealing with emotional flashbacks and what they are, what they feel like, how do you tell if you have a flashback, and this is going to be primarily for those of you that have had trauma from your childhood. So if you're raised by narcissists, chances are you deal with this and you might not even realize that you deal with it, and it'll be very, very comforting for you to learn what these things are and how you can actually help yourself through the process and why they can actually be a good thing. Let's go through and first just talk about the stages of an emotional flashback. So again, all this information I'm giving you is coming from my favorite guy, Peter Walker. I'm going to go down through some of the things that he talks about on the progression of a flashback. The first thing is that flashbacks start in the fight or flight mode. So somebody might scream at you. Let's say someone screams at you like they're mad, and you flashback emotionally. And what happens is you don't see a picture in your head. You know, a lot of times you see that on TV, right? That's not accurate for somebody that's got the complex PTSD. Instead, all of a sudden you feel a completely different emotion. It starts with a fight or flight. Then, if the primary emotion that you're feeling is fear, you're going to start to feel anxious, panicky, and some people even get suicidal. Now, if your primary emotion is despair, then you tend to start to feel like you're paralyzed, you want to go hide, and you start to feel super numb. You like check out. So then the first stage of what you're going to feel is first you feel really small, you feel young, you feel fragile, powerless, and helpless. Then it goes into the next phase, which is toxic shame, where you suddenly feel really low self-esteem out of nowhere. Suddenly you just feel like maybe you're super ugly, maybe you think that you're just worth nothing, you just have this overwhelming feeling like you're stupid, all of that kind of stuff. Your self-esteem tanks. I used to not understand why this would happen to me. You know, I'm a confident person. I don't have issues with low self-esteem. But when I would get a flashback, all of a sudden, tank. My self-esteem would go out the window. And I would start to do like the most insecure things to dig myself out of this hole. But because I didn't know I was in a flashback, I didn't know how to get myself out of that. The thing is that this is usually how you felt when you're being abused as a child. So what you are flashing back to is that unresolved abuse as a little kid. So you are emotionally going back to some place in time, and again, you don't have to even remember it. You don't even have to remember that moment. You're emotionally going back to that time, and all of those emotions that you did not get to process as a little kid are now risen to the surface, and you're feeling those emotions. So, you know, when you're going through this, like if you are struggling, like you think you're super ugly, and I've experienced this where you just think, oh my gosh, like how could anyone look at me? And you could be the most beautiful person on the outside. You could even be a model and feel like you're completely ugly. That's how extreme it gets. Then you go from the toxic shame phase to the abandonment depression. So after your like self-esteem goes through the floor, and you feel worthless and like you can't do anything and you're not anybody and all of this kind of stuff, you just feel horrible about yourself. Then you go into depression and you feel completely hopeless and completely helpless. You might even feel like you're going to be homeless, or you know, you're just completely abandoned. You go back to that place of not feeling safe. Typically when this happens, you isolate yourself and you just feel humiliated. It's really, really difficult to get out of this whole process. So if you feel like you're on edge, if you feel like you're all of a sudden you've got low self-esteem out of nowhere, you feel like you're worthless, you feel small, you might feel fragile, on edge, you're probably in a flashback. Then comes the all or nothing thinking. All of a sudden you become overly critical of yourself and overly critical of other people. So you start judging other people out of nowhere, and you start to judge yourself intensely, and you go in this whole black and white mindset. So where does that come from? Because if you're not a judgmental person, why all of a sudden are you judging other people? Okay, how many have done this? I have. So it comes back to you flashing back to your narcissistic parent being judgmental. So all of a sudden, those emotions that you experienced as a little kid, you are feeling the emotions that you did as a little kid when you saw your parent criticizing another person or criticizing you. And so that voice is what's coming up internally, and they are picking you apart That voice is picking you apart, and it's picking other people apart. So it's really important that you understand it's not you being super judgmental. That's not who you are. You are flashing back to the narcissist that is the one that is super critical. So at this point, something minor happens. It's unfairness, or it's just a minor upset, and it feels like an emergency, and it feels like the biggest injustice in the world. And you might just flip out, right? Anything can just push you over the edge. So when you start to go into mindfulness and practice mindfulness, and let me tell you, this is a practice that you have to force yourself into, learn and continue to learn and continue to practice and get it into your routine. But when you can really practice mindfulness, what will happen is you can start to manage the flashbacks. You'll begin to get out of them. Then you can recognize that they are examples of real emergencies and real injustices that happened to you as a kid. They are also proof that you were traumatized. And I think that this is very, very important that you hold on to when you're going through your recovery. Because especially if you still have a narcissist in your life and they're still abusing you and they have access to you and you go no contact, and then the flashbacks get worse. All the stuff comes up and you start flashing back because you're going through that healing process. You can say to yourself, I am taking care of myself and I'm healing myself. And that's why I am separated from this person at this time, because I need to heal myself and manage these flashbacks. And you get that reinforcement that yes, what they did was wrong. And what they did was they traumatized you. And now you're processing all that trauma. For me, this has been a great reminder, because when you've been abused by a narcissist, you're always questioning yourself. You're always questioning your reality, your opinion, all of this kind of stuff, because you were never allowed to have an opinion. You were never allowed to say things how they were. You were not allowed to express yourself. And so when you start to realize that this is a reinforcement of, yes, you're on the right path. You have been abused, and it is time for you to pay attention to what exactly you are flashing back to. So let's talk about triggers. Triggers can be anything from a cat looking at you weird because your parent gave you that weird look and it triggers you. It could be anyone saying anything. It could be you walking past a building. It could be horrible world events like the coronavirus. If you deal with this, it could be setting you off like crazy. Difficult choices, illnesses, anything that is, trauma related, anything. So it could be big or small. When you start to realize the things that set you off, try to do things that will keep you from getting triggered. That's going to help you, especially in the beginning, when you want to limit the number of flashbacks you get. You'll get less and less flashbacks as you manage them and work through them. Because when you have a flashback, what it is, it's a delayed response from your childhood. And when you start to process those feelings and emotions, the flashback will dissolve and it will no longer trigger you again. And then as a result, you build this increasing healthy sense of self. So don't look at a flashback as a negative thing. When you have one, it's a great thing to go, oh, this is something that has left that I did not process yet. So there shouldn't be any condemnation if you're having a flashback. This shouldn't be like, this is how I'm going to be, I'm always just going to have flashbacks. Recognize it as the little child in me experienced something and was traumatized. It needs to get processed and it needs to get dealt with. And when you process it, deal with it through mindfulness, it's not going to come up again. So this is why flashbacks can be a good thing. Although they can be very, very severe in the beginning, they get less and less severe. And the more mindful you get, the better your life gets. And it's really the unresolved childhood issues that cause the flashbacks. And so the more that you're able to process it, the better off. Now, one thing you can do is you can go do EMDR with a therapist. If you do that, I highly recommend that you find a therapist that is familiar with Dr. McBride's 5-step healing process and really understands narcissistic abuse. Because if you go to somebody that just knows PTSD and they don't understand personality disorders, they're not going to understand your type of trauma. And that has been my experience. And I had gone to a therapist. I did EMDR. It was helpful, but she didn't know anything about narcissistic abuse and the stuff that I was going through. And she really could not help me. So, because as children of narcissists, we also have a hard time trusting people. Make sure that you find somebody that you're comfortable with, that you trust. And if you go and you go to one session and you hate them, don't go back, right? If you don't feel like they're the personality type that you like, don't go back to them. Make sure you find somebody that you feel like you could really build a friendship with, because it's super important for you in the healing process to build some sort of connection. Now, you might not be ready for that. And if you're not, that is perfectly okay. It's not a requirement. It's helpful, but it can be done at any time. Does it alleviate some of the trauma and help you process it faster? Yes. But it is not a requirement. And the other thing is that as you process trauma and you go through mindfulness and begin to process a lot of it yourself, you'll find that you need others' help less and less, right? So I'm going to put down in the notes below 13 steps to manage emotional flashbacks. So you can go through this list. I use this list especially when things were super, super tough and I was having extreme flashbacks, and it's a process that I'll take myself through to get myself out of it and to process all of the stuff. So guys, thank you so much for watching my YouTube channel, and we'll see you next week.